Development Initiative. And for the familiar faces are here, many of you know that we are in the process of renovating 1.1 million square feet of historic manufacturing space into the Midwest's largest mixed-use technology campus. And those renovations are ongoing right now in Building 113. And so we're excited today to showcase some other innovation and technology that's happening in the city. And so if you're new to the Studebaker redevelopment and you want to catch me afterwards, I'd be happy to let you know what's happening in the buildings just to the south of Union Station Technology Center. But today we're here to welcome Mike Keene and Dwayne Burkholder. Dwayne, come on up. Mike is a retired professor from IUSB. He was the director of IUSB's Center for a Sustainable Future. And he's just recently retired, but not letting his foot off the pedal at all. So he's got some wonderful concepts for net zero homes and a tiny living community that he's going to share today. And so there'll be plenty of time for Q&A as well. I know that this topic has generated a lot of discussion online, and I'm really interested to see as a community what kind of questions come up in the discussion today. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming out. Dwayne Burkholder is my partner here. As you see, he's president of Burkholder Building and also New Energy Homes. What we're going to do today is we're going to tell you a story, and we're going to try to do that in about 25 minutes. So we're not going to be able to get into as much detail as we might, but we want to have plenty of time for everybody to have conversation. And what this is a story about sustainability. It's a story about innovation and how those come. And that's kind of why Willow invited us here, really, is we have these monthly meetings to talk about various types of innovation and things that are going on around the city. And there's an amazing amount of things happening here. So it kind of then blew up into a focus on tiny homes. So we're going to try to spend most of our time talking about tiny homes, but we really want to sort of tell this story how we got to this point. And so it's really a story about how innovation actually works. And I'm sure that the folks here at Renaissance Center and other places who engage in innovation around the city could tell you a similar story. So our story is about transforming the way America builds its homes. And that's the one thing that sort of united Dwayne and I and our other partners, Chuck Lehman and John Harris, for different reasons. We were interested in wanting to change the way we build homes in America. So normally when you start with innovations, you begin with a problem. And our problem begins at home. That is, in our homes, where we live. And the problem we see is Americans' unsustainable houses and lifestyle. And the lack of any significant innovation in our homes since we left the log cabin. About the only thing that's changed since we left the log cabin is our houses have gotten bigger. And we've added a few things like air conditioning. And so the square feet has gone up to about the average square footage now is over 3,000 square foot. The average home costs well over $250,000. And what have we done with that change? Burgeoning basements, growing garages, clusters of apartments. Our homes have become castles of stuff. But they've also become islands of isolation that are keeping us from integrating and interacting with each other. We used to live in communities where everybody from different backgrounds would live and work and cross paths together. And that's something that we've also seen change. In addition, these homes that we build are tremendously wasteful. They're often made of materials that compromise our health, and they are using lots of fossil fuels and putting CO2 into the atmosphere. And then finally, in many cases, they become so expensive that not everybody has an opportunity to afford them. So whenever you have an innovation, you start with a problem. That's our problem. Our innovation to solve this is the tiny living community. And what the tiny living community is basically clusters of high quality net zero energy. That means that homes produce as much energy as they use, homes that are clustered around shared commons, what's called a pocket neighborhood that fosters community and people connecting to one another. And so what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about how we got there. And we think that we are talking about something that is what we call a transformative innovation. Innovations happen all the time, but a lot of times they're what you call incremental innovation. So if you take a look at it, the development of the first telephone, that was a fundamentally transformational innovation. It fundamentally transformed the way society works. But when we added a dial to it and added some push buttons, those were incremental innovations. But then we saw, boom, the cell phone, another transformative innovation. Transformative innovations occur not when you just do one innovation, but when a number of separate innovations come together and they form a synergy that's more powerful than any one of them. That's what the cell phone represents. And we think that that's what the tiny living community represents. And when we're talking about the core innovations we're bringing together, they include net zero building systems, tiny house design, pocket neighborhoods, placemaking, low impact development practices. Those are our core ones. There's some others. Each one of these by themselves is interesting, but you bring them together and they give us an opportunity to really have an impact we wouldn't have had before. Now, the two things that we want to talk most about are the net zero building system, because that's kind of what got Dwayne coming to the process, and then we'll talk about how they all come together in a tiny house community. But the story of innovation started this way. I was working at IU South Bend trying to create a program around sustainability, and I met Dwayne. And Dwayne was the guy who was trying to figure out how to build houses that would be more energy efficient and more sustainable, but he was having a hard time getting traction. Because what happens with innovations, I just read a quote, nobody considers something really an innovation until it's an imitation, and other people are already doing it. And when they're first starting, then people don't know how to deal with it. So when you try to talk to bankers, when you're trying to talk to appraisers, when you're trying to talk to zoning and building code folks, if they don't understand it, it's not easy to get it together. So Dwayne and I began talking about how we might get one of these things down. That was 3 or 4 years ago. And after a couple of years and some fits and starts, we decided that we're just going to have to do it. So we were actually building some conventional size homes. Dwayne's already been building in other places. We're building some here in South Bend. And to bring in and get that going, we brought in another person by the name of Chuck Lehman, who is a placemaker with Lehman Landscaping. Chuck started talking about, Mike, have you heard this thing called tiny homes? And I said, yeah. He said, wouldn't it be fun for us to do something with that as well? And I said, yeah, and we started talking to Dwayne, and Dwayne says, you know what? My building system would be perfect for these things. And then we met a guy by the name of John Harris, and John created something called Greentown. That's the one-day conference we've had here in South Bend a couple of times. And we started talking to John about this, and he said, you guys, we've got something here that we can put together as a community, and we can market it, tell the story, and launch it in South Bend and move it out beyond here across the region and maybe across the country. So each one of us came together in different ways, but that's how innovation works. And that's how we've come together. And now what Dwayne's going to do is he's going to talk to you a little bit about the net zero building system that is sort of at the core of what we're doing with these tiny homes.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. And I'm glad to be working in South Bend. Just connecting with Mike and Mike is very connected here in South Bend. When you grow up in a small community and you do what you've always done, you don't always, like Mike said, get a lot of traction. So I've been building some net zero homes. We've been learning as we're using an innovative building system. And what really got me started was just the entire, just talking to different people. Our building system, the way we do things really hasn't changed for, 50 to 70 years. We've really been doing the same thing. Well, we do the same thing because we're comfortable. And I've been working in the building industry since I've been 7 years old, I guess. Walking around behind Dad, riding with him, watching what he did. Got to thinking about it, and as I started getting into just looking at my business model and saying, what is the next thing that we're really going to address, and that is affordability and living. Use the information that I had and really keyed in on one thing, and that is, why aren't we talking about how heat flows? Why aren't we talking about, because what we're really doing is we're controlling heat, either keeping heat out or we're keeping heat in. And depending where you go in the country, it's either one's more important. I'm not going to talk a lot, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because, like Mike said, we're going to get through some generalities, some basic ideas, and then open it up for questions. But really, what was at the core of what I was trying to do is, my goal was to drop the consumption, to drop the demand in half. That was my first goal. How can I drop the demand for heating and cooling in half? And then, you know, the real target is to get to the net zero or the net positive footprint. Produce as much energy as what I'm using. But it's a lot easier once you start cutting that demand down. So initially I said I want to cut it in half. We did. We get HERS ratings in the 50s without renewables. And so now you get, once you get that demand down, now you can put a smaller renewable. In our case, we use a laminate, thin film laminate solar, which I've got a sample here you can look at afterward. We laminate that right to our steel roofing. So one, it's discreet, it's very, very appealing, and it's very secure. Some other things that I thought were very important, and that in looking at the net zero, you can build net zero, but when I started, the benchmark was between $250 to $400 a square foot. That's not affordable. That's not sustainable. I wanted to get to something comparable to a market rate. If I could do that, and Mike kind of coined this for me, he kept saying, you know, these are the most affordable homes in the world. Because we don't buy homes like we do cars. We look at the gas mileage, we look at the maintenance, we look at the initial cost, and maybe we look at the resale, but we don't do that as well in homes. In homes, we typically look at what does it cost me to get into it. And that is, we've got to change that whole paradigm. That is part of what I've set out to do. You know, we're going to get a different result, we've got to do something different. So what do? We look at heat flow. We look at the three forms of heat transfer. We don't just look at conduction, which is your R value, we look at radiant and convective heat movement. I look at my products and I say, you know, I can use something, but it's got to have an economic value to it when I integrate it into our building system. We try to do out of the box thinking, so we look at things differently and yet accomplish the same result, and that is to create a nice living environment. Wherever I can, I use recycled or recyclable products. For instance, the steel roof. It's highly reflective, and yet it's from recycled steel, and it can be recycled at the end of its lifespan. A big piece has been to teach and to educate. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I've done a lot of one-on-ones. I've done, you know, some builder groups. I've done locals, and whenever I get a chance, I talk about it with friends. Just a quick graphic on the three different kinds of heat transfer, and as you can see, conduction, and this is one from our insulation company, a graphic from them. Conduction is definitely not the only issue to deal with or worry about. How do we do that? How do we accomplish it? Well, instead of a 6-inch wall system, I end up with a 10.5-inch wall system. I reduce most of my thermal breaks, so I don't get near as much conduction. The way we build, and especially when it's slab on grade, I reduce my concrete by 80 to 85%. So there's a big cost savings. And I challenge people, put those cost savings into the renewables. get it to the net zero. We use integrated air spaces, again, just understanding the heat flow. Integrate reflectives to stop our radiant heat gain. Hybrid insulation package, cool roof paint systems. And when you get to that point, you can actually drop your heating and cooling loads by 50, 60, and 70% because you really don't need that capacity. So there's another big savings in your construction. And then I mentioned the thin film solar. Here's some ideas and concepts that we show to prospects. We haven't built all these. It's just it's an idea starter, but these homes don't look any different necessarily, except simple roof lines. In order to get the integrated solar, you typically need clean roof lines. So here's some possibilities. Here's some we've done. Again, you can see the thin film. We can get as unique as you want to get. Simple, mixed use. We've talked to quite a few people about the mixed use concept. And now just a few, these would be two examples of what we're proposing in the tiny living community. So again, just to recap, faster construction, that also leads to savings in your cost, and you can go through the list there. One of the reasons that I hold out that we are the most affordable home, and that is when you look at a 10 to 15 or 20-year picture, if you're in your home that long, you start adding up what you're going to spend on that home in the lifespan that you're there, and you add everything that you use while you're owning that home or renting that home. And by the time you add in utilities, at $300 a month for combined utilities, you're going to use approximately $170,000 to $200,000 in utilities at any kind of inflation rate over a 30-year period. So what is that home really costing you? And then just, again, some of the different applications, and I'm going to let Mike take over from here.
So the net zero is one of the core innovations that we bring into this platform of the tiny living community. As you can see, Dwayne's been building some single family. He's also in other countries done some 2-3 story mixed use. He also has done some housing for Haiti. His houses are also very, very strongly built. They'll stand what's the rating on wind?
I can get up to 200, 220 mile-an-hour winds. Category 5 hurricane. We can get it as robust as you want to make it.
So it's also very robust. The reason for that is because he's using the post and beam method as opposed to 2x4s, and that allows you to have much more robust. And so those are implications, but we also think that in one of the other applications of this innovation is the tiny living community. And so in addition to the coming up with this concept of the tiny living community, this is clusters of small houses. The reason we call it the tiny living community, because it's not about the house, it's about the community and the life that you have with it. And so sometimes people in the tiny house movement like to say, smaller house, bigger life. So we're also incorporating innovation from the tiny house movement, but one big difference between what we're doing and what we see primarily you see on TV and other places is these tiny homes are not on wheels, they're not on trailers. They're being built on a solid foundation, just like any other house that would be built on a solid foundation. The advantage of that is, number one, municipalities are a little bit more okay with it because they're not worried about somebody picking it up and taking it away. The other difference is if you build one on wheels, it's got to be on an 8-foot trailer to be able to move it anywhere. So you actually get a reduction in our limitation in your design dimensions. So we use the highest quality materials. I saw that somebody had put on the Facebook that these are very high per square foot cost. If it's a a 400 square foot house and it's $50,000, that's $200 per square foot, that is very high. But the reason that we do that is because we're not making $4,000, it's not a $1.6 million house. We're going to give nothing but the highest quality materials. These things are built not only to withstand high winds, but to last a half a century or more. So we've got solid doors, brass fixtures. We're not talking about, you know, things you can punch your hand through. So that's, you know, the ability to do smaller is you can do less space, but a much higher quality. So we put that into these things. High energy HVAC. We do what's called subtractive design. That is when you start to look at both the external, but really the internal space, you take away everything that's not necessary. Walk around your typical house and think, how much of this do you really have to have? They sometimes talk about some of these houses being 20-minute houses because you look at them for 20 minutes and that's the average amount of time it takes somebody to buy a house. Multiple roof lines, you walk in and you got the huge sort of area you stand in. You don't live there. You just wait, seat there and welcome your friends. So taking out what we don't need, but making sure that what we keep is multifunctional, no space is wasted. But these things are small, they've got to be beautiful. People don't want to live in shacks. They have got to be beautiful, elegant places that are affordable and sustainable. So that's what we've pulled from the tiny house movement. But we've also brought a couple of other innovations in. Pocket neighborhoods, actually, we like to sometimes think of these things as innovations, right? Pocket neighborhoods go back to the Middle Ages. But the idea is that what you have is you have a neighborhood. What social scientists tell us is the average household can get to know about 17 others. And create a connection, a sense of community. You start to move beyond that, and you begin to lose contact with one another, the ability to know each other in a sort of intimate fashion. So that's why our sweet spot for numbers on these things are between 8 and 17 to 20. But a pocket neighborhood is designed so that what you do is you put your structures around the outside of a shared commons. We see some of this in the East Coast here. There's some early communities that were intentionally built to follow that. And you can see that what we're trying to do is meaningful scales where people are going to be built to connect. We build it so that moving through the built environment, it causes you to interact with your neighbors. Right now, our built environment causes us not to. We get in our garage, we get in our car, we go to the underground parking lot, we get in the elevator, we go to our offices, and we go home. Maybe you go to the coffee house downstairs at the bottom of the building. So here's an opportunity to do a little bit more of that. But we also build in layers of privacy because you don't want somebody living in your lap. So when you do a pocket neighborhood, you have a shared commons, and what you have is 5 layers of privacy that allow you to slowly get more privacy so that when you get to your house, you have that sense of privacy as well. So it's a conscious design that we incorporate. Then we've also added something called placemaking. Placemaking has largely been associated with public spaces, trying to take a public space and make it something that has an emotional connection for folks, a reason to be there. One of the great examples of placemaking in South Bend is the new lights on the river. You know, people are connected to that. I mean, my wife and I go down and we love to look at it. Anytime somebody comes to visit us, we take them there at night and say, and it might be 10 below zero, right? In Millward, we're still taking them up, parking next to the Emporium, or maybe if we want to stay, we'll eat there, and we go look at these lights because it's become a place. Well, placemaking doesn't have to be limited to just public spaces. You can also use it for private spaces. But what it's about is sort of getting people in the place to think about what do they want to see there, and how do they want to connect to each other, how do they want to use this space, what is its history, and how can we pull that? Renaissance Center here, we're pulling on the place, the history of Studebaker, the place that basically caused South Bend to grow, the river, the place that launched us. And then low-impact development practices. We want these to be not only energy efficient in terms of sustainability, use less materials, produce less waste, but also deal with water. I mean, one of the things we know if you read in newspapers is we've got a $750 million stormwater problem in this town, and every town our size, smaller and larger across the country, have the same problem. So if we can deal with low-impact development practices, we can collect that water on site and we can use it so that, look at that, would you rather put a grade pipe in the ground or a couple of bio-retention areas, a rain garden, and some permeable fauna along there? Which one looks better? It does the same thing. So these are the core innovations that we've pulled together: the net zero building system, the tiny house design, pocket neighborhoods, placemaking, low impact development. And by putting them together in a synergistic fashion, we create the tiny living community that has multiple applications. When we first started talking about it, our first application was thinking about doing kind of urban infill, particularly in the second ring. When you think about cities, you can think of them in the rings. The center circle is the core of the city. And then you have the next ring is where you have, close-in residential neighborhoods. Beyond that, you begin to move sort of mixed residential, commercial out. Beyond that, and light industrial, then you get into industrial, and then you get into countryside. So we were thinking about, we live in South Bend, that's our context. We've got 1,000, we've had 1,000 houses, knocked a bunch down, rehabbed a few. We've got a lot of vacant lots here. We can put some of these lots together and put down these tiny house communities. And one of the problems that they solve is, first of all, no one person has to make a big risky investment. And second of all, you're not out there by yourself. You're there with a number of folks that can come with you. And with the tiny house problem, not only do municipalities not like houses on wheels, because their trailers, they could be, you wake up one day and you see it's gone and there's a straight pipe sticking up next to you. A lot of people don't want that in their neighborhoods. We can see that on Facebook right now in response to the articles in the paper the other day. The other thing people are concerned about is they don't want a $40,000 or $50,000 house next to their $140,000 or $150,000 house or more, because that will affect appraisal values. If we cluster these in a tiny neighborhood around a shared commons, then it doesn't become a single element that you're costing. It becomes part of the fabric of the neighborhood, and you're going to get the value of the house and the neighborhood together. And if we create a cool place, and this is what we want to do, let's make these things neat. So it's not just a place for people to live, but people are going to want to come by and see these things. They're going to walk by, they're going to want to ride their bikes by, they're going to want to drive by and bring them in. But then we also began to find out, and in some conversations with some college folks, is that campuses might be interested in these things. They have their residential housing, dorms, and things like that. But one of the recent innovations in pedagogy in colleges and universities, and I know about this from being there, is what they call learning communities, where you get about 15 to 20 or 25 students with 1 or 2 professors that begin to connect together in a community rather than just showing up for class and not knowing each other. So I was talking with one of the guys up at Holy Cross, and their director of student life, Kelly Jordan, and he said, you know what, we might be able to connect us with a learning community. And wow, yes, a tiny living learning community on a college campus. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? And then Chuck Lehman was talking to some folks in a residential elderly care center, and they were saying, this might be something that would be kind of cool for another niche in that level. Because right now, you've got some places where, for example, our Holy Cross here, you've got a place where you can live in your duplexes. Those are pretty big. The next step is you got to move into an apartment, and then you move into a room. Well, there might be some folks that would say, you know what, I'm not quite ready to take care of this big house. I don't really want to be in the apartment right now, but what if I can live in a tiny house that is steps away from being able to move in, but I can also, go to dinner and meet other people, but I'll stay in my little house and take care of it and have my independence. We've got some interest in that level. And then resort communities have been places that have used cottages and things like this, so this isn't obvious for that one. And we do find that there are a lot of places already using tiny houses for the affordable housing market, trying to deal with people in homelessness or teens. Detroit has got something very interesting going, a number of communities. And so the other thing about transformative innovations is that they have multiple applications. That's why they change things. You bring together a number of previously unconnected innovations. Think of the cell phone, right? We've got the printer, we've got the telephone, the printer, the camera, the telephone, the radio. I once saw a little graphic that the cell phone has replaced 50 different devices. This is not that level, but it still is significant. It really can. And it's not only, that we want to sort of necessarily help people think about changing the way we live. Not everybody's going to live in a tiny home. I'm not ready to go there right now. But some people want to be there. And whether you want to be there or not, there are certain techniques that we can learn. It's kind of like NASCAR, right? I'm not going to drive a NASCAR, but what NASCAR does is it tells us how to make cars work really well. And what this tiny living communities are doing is they're providing a niche that some people are very interested in, but they're also teaching us about how to build houses that are energy effective and efficient, how to design and use space, how to simplify our lifestyles. And so that's been kind of a missing sort of niche in the market. So with that, that's kind of our presentation, and what we'd like to do now is just open it up for questions for anybody. In the back, ma'am? The question is, where are the net zero houses being built in the area? Dwayne can tell us.
Well, the last one we just did was in what's the Troyer? Southfield Village on Miami there. The Troyer Group subdivision. We just did one in there. Roosevelt Road, there's one being built.
So there's not a lot of those. You're also building in Asheville?
We're getting ready to build a community in Asheville, North Carolina. We've got one in South Carolina. We've got about 6 or 7 that are built now. One in Napa.
Pardon? What you can do is you can see a couple of things that we do.
You have parking in the front.
A couple of things. Number one, we're trying to put these in dense areas. Our ideal location is in a dense area, relatively dense, and at a transportation node where there are multiple amenities, so that we can minimize the need for cars. But if you do need to have a car, it's organized so that you can see here along the side and the back, there'll be at least one parking space for the folks in the cars. If we're on a residential street, you can also get a couple on the street. So there is a place for that. But we're hoping to have these where bike lanes are, and we hope to have Zipcar or some other car share program stationed right there, so that we can create what we call a kind of, in larger cities it's called transportation-oriented development. Within a quarter of a mile of any transit station in a place like Chicago, Washington, D.C., they have a huge amount of density. As a matter of fact, if we looked at the period from 2008 to 2015 when we had the recession, only one area in the country didn't have problems with their housing prices. It was anything within a quarter mile of a transit station. So we're trying to do that ideally near a bus station, but we also are going to have car off-street and on-street car parking. I think this is
Yes. North Carolina has building codes and zoning that permits small house development, tiny houses. And so where do we stand with that in Indiana?
Actually, there was just an addendum, is that what it's called? It's called, that is, the IBC is actually changing. There are different codes that are recognizing this is more than a mobile unit, and we want it to integrate into our neighborhoods. So there are amendments being written to actually create some control over what's happening, and that would be nationally.
So there's two types of building codes you got to think about. Codes you got to think about. One's building codes, that's for the safety of the building. These houses meet all existing building codes because of Dwayne's system. They're smaller, but they're still using the same building codes. There is a group that's building a set of separate building codes that are meant to specifically focus on tiny houses as well. The other issue is zoning codes, and that's a larger issue across the country, because very often what you find is your zoning codes have certain sizes of lots, certain requirements for the size of house and things like that. So that's part of the challenge of innovation like a tiny house, is that it's going to require, probably to begin with, you do 1 or 2 zoning variances, but eventually what you want to do is you want to see some changes in zoning codes. And we're seeing that happen as well. So there's a number of communities. Austin, Texas is one, Portland's another, and there's some others. They're starting to take a look at the zoning codes and see how we can integrate these into a way that makes sense, so that every time somebody wants to build one, they don't have to go through a bunch of variances, but also it still maintains the character and the fabric of the community. And so South Bend we're hoping South Bend will do the same thing. So what we'd really like to do is make South Bend a pilot of this kind of innovation. One of the things that, we're thinking is, we want to start this in South Bend. There are other communities that are interested in this product. We really want to start here because, first of all, we believe in South Bend. Second of all, we think this has been a great place for innovation. The stuff that has happened here in the last 2 or 3 years is absolutely amazing. This community, those of you who have been around here for more than 10, 12 years, this community does not look the same anymore. It is really doing some special stuff. And we're getting national recognition. So part of it's selfishness, right? you know, when South Bend starts being recognized as one of the most progressive cities with smart sewers in the wild, you know, where do you want to be? You want to be here, so you can get, you know, under those coattails. There was a person over here.
Correction for you, sir. The IBC is actually for commercial, and the IR is for residential. I've been a building inspector since 1990 here in South Bend, and we attend monthly meetings because of the city where building commissioners and people that are in the industry. And one of the biggest things that you're going to have trouble is I'm all for tiny houses and permanent foundations, but I think the biggest thing you're going to find is the biggest problem. Changing the international building code that you make reference to states that right now as it stands, the minimum is 900 square feet for residential homes. To get it to accept something smaller, I mean, more power to you and good luck. But I will say this, that a small house, and what your concept is, I think it's super. The biggest thing you're gonna, I think is I'm trying to get my thoughts here together, is the fact that everybody opposes it in literally the cities in the state of Indiana. In the state of Indiana, we're so far behind accepting the International Building Code of 20. We're like 9 years, the code is like 2009 or 5.
Yeah.
Here in Ohio. And Indiana has so many amendments, and because of it, it's so complicated. I mean, if you can get them to sign off and get an amendment,
Well, thank you both for the correction, and also bringing up that really very important point. I was talking with somebody else, a friend of mine who's doing some innovation in the vertical farming space, and they've run into a couple of hiccups here and there over the time. And he had his staff together in a meeting the other day. He said, "Hey guys, innovation and entrepreneurship is a contact sport, and so you know you're going to get some knocks." But you know, there's two ways of looking at it. You can get discouraged, or you can sort of welcome them. We welcome them because the way you do innovation is you've got to get the challenges so you can help work through them. And then working with a win-win solution, because I think, you know, people have serious concerns, and they ought to, about different ways of doing things. We shouldn't jump willy-nilly into anything. But when we think carefully, we also should not be afraid of the future. And so by working carefully, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And so, you know, we don't want to disrupt the fabric of anybody's neighborhood. We think that we can bring this into a way that's actually going to fit. And then the other thing about innovation is the challenge is once you get it down and people see it, they all want it, right? When we used to look at those squiggly light bulbs, people used to say, "What the hell is that?" You know, and the first time that somebody saw something like this and said, "Oh, that's going to be a phone, and you're not going to use a radio, a television, or anything else anymore," everybody said, "Heck no." Now the whole world's got these things. More people have cell phones than have electricity, right? So innovation, you know, has challenges, and so we're well aware of that one. So there's a person back here in the middle.
I actually have a statement and then a question for
Sure.
you. As far as the International Building Codes, there are two people in the tiny house community nationally that are working on it, Macy Miller and Andrew Morrison, and they've actually gone through the first round. They're working through several more to get them so that once they're developed internationally, then basically we all kind of copy the international codes. So it'd make it more easier for states and then locally. So my one question, as someone who currently lives in a tiny house that's under 200 square feet, how is the city is responding to, are they only responding to foundation, or are they also responding to people on wheels and that want to have a little bit more mobility?
Right now, two things. Number one, the code you're talking about, that addendum, that's been put out there, so that there is a full set of codes that have been developed that are being presented, and so we've actually got copies of those. We've sent them to the city, and so they have them too. At this point in time, we haven't had any concrete conversations with the city. What we've had is some informal meetings to show us what our concept is. And once we have drawings and other things like that, we're going to be able to go and meet with them and talk to them about where they're going to put them. I think the challenge with having the homes on wheels is that they're very nice and well designed, but the mobility is the issue. It's like, you know, putting a trailer or an RV somewhere and then pulling it out. So I think, there's going to need to be some work on that. I know that some communities are dealing with that by creating tiny house parks that allow people to put them in. There might be some, you might know well better than I do about where there might be some cities that are actually, allowing people to put tiny houses in inner city residences next to houses. I'm not familiar with that, but
Mostly Oregon.
yeah, mostly. And so our focus right now has been to try to take an integrated look and put these, not even putting them down necessarily as singles, although if a person wants a single one, another advantage of the tiny house is that if you have an existing residence, you can increase density in the city without increasing the money you spend on infrastructure, because you're just using what's already there. And we used to do this, right? It was called the mother-in-law house or the granny house. These were fairly common. So in some sense, part of this is going back to the future. Much of what we're doing is going back to the future. Quite frankly, much of what we're trying to do to make a decent, sustainable future is back to the future. Beth?
Yeah, Deb and I have been kind of longingly looking at some of these year-round garden greenhouse things, and I wondered if you have thought to incorporate year-round gardening into part of the communal area of your tiny home communities.
Certainly, in the shared area, I suspect what we're going to see is some kind of community gardens. I know on a different project we're working on, we've got three properties together, and we're not creating a common area, but since we get to design it, we're putting garden boxes, and we're going to add them ourselves right at the boundaries, so the three properties are separately owned, but their garden boxes on their own properties look like a community garden. So again, how do you take a built environment with a couple of small things and cause people to work together? That's something we're doing. That's going to add to our cost an extra $360. And in doing that, we'll have created 3 opportunities for people to grow their food and connect with them. $360. Think about the kinds of things you can do with just creative ideas and that much money.
How's the ownership? Co-op ownership?
We don't know that yet. I mean, this is what we're working out. Okay. The question was, what's the ownership going to work out? Is it going to be a co-op ownership or what? There's numerous possibilities for ownership structures here. My guess is probably the most likely is it'll be kind of similar to what we might see where people own their own houses, but there's a homeowners association that deals with some of the common areas, the gardening, soil removal and stuff like that. One might be able to also think of more interesting homeownership opportunities such as cooperatives and things like that. But I think we're going to sort of focus on the easiest and the one that makes most sense, and then think about some of the others. You and then you, right?
One thing that I think is kind of interesting, you said back to the future for our future, or back to the past for the future. There's a kind of unique layout for houses just east of Park Avenue near Lamont Terrace. And I was looking on my phone and I don't even see a name for the street, but it's where they took all the properties, put them around the perimeter, and then they have a kind of a central park yard. And so, people have done different things in this town. That is quite different, but you never know.
Yeah, that's a pocket neighborhood. And as I said, those things have existed. There's some famous ones on the East Coast. There's a famous one over in Chicago. There's ones in other places. You and then you, I think.
In reference to the sense of place that spoke of in smart growth initiatives, what sort of areas do you have in mind already to center around for sense of place, like specifically historical areas or historical buildings, and how would you plan on refurbishing and repurposing those ecologically? And do you plan on any other smart growth initiatives to help build these communities?
Right now, we're focused on the tiny living communities. We're looking at some various places they might fit along Portage Avenue. Seems like it might, there's some area in that near northwest neighborhood. Bowen Creek is another area that might be a possibility. The Martins area, there's just, at this point, we don't have anything specific. We're looking at a couple of areas. And then what will happen is that it's only after we know where we would put one of these things down that we'll be able to start the placemaking process, bring the neighbors together, ask them what is important or special about their place, what do they think of, what do they want to draw upon. One of the things that we do is we take a look at the history of the area. How did this area connect to the rest of the city and its growth? Are there any historical figures and developments, businesses, not-for-profits, organizations that might have been connected to the community in some kind of way. So each one will be a little bit different depending on where it's at. We got one back there, and then in the back, and then we'll move up front. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think so, and actually, I think there's a number of, what we might have quoted in the past said halfway, but another nicer way of putting it is, sort of immersed living situations. And I think that could be a good possibility, and so I think that might be something that would be very interesting. We've actually got some not-for-profit organizations in the place that do create sort of group homes around in different ways, serving, in some cases, autistic and other folks. It would be kind of interesting if they would be interested in trying a small community as a pilot to see if that could work, because I think that's a good idea. In the back, and then we've got a couple up here. Steve?
My question was about ownership as well. So
Okay.
I guess the follow-up is, are you aware of any banks or lending institutions that are open to the idea of financing new
Yeah, we don't have any formal agreements, so I can't say any ways it be. But we have 3 local institutions that are interested in providing finance packages. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to try to identify some preferred lenders so that potential buyers, they would of course have to use the banks that we provide, but if we have some banks that already understand the product, it'll make it a lot easier. Because again, the challenge for Dwayne has been, even with the conventional size, net zero homes, is they don't know how to appraise it. And right now, people do not collateralize solar. So when you go to find a loan, it won't fit into a package that then gets sold. And if it can't be sold as a package and commoditized, then they often will not collateralize your home. What we've got the advantage of is we have some very fine local banks who they package and sell some of their loans, but they keep some of theirs in their own portfolio. That gives them that local flexibility. And we think that a couple of those banks are kind of interested in helping us develop this. Once again, once you get it planned, it's no problem. I don't know if people don't know it, but the General Motors Finance Corporation was begun because you used to not be able to get a loan for a car. This was back in the 1930s. And so when they wanted to build the cars out, they couldn't get anybody to collateralize it. So they started their own finance company, and now all banks do it. And so it's going to be the same thing with solar and the same thing with these products, but you've got to get, again, that pilot. You've got to be able to kick it, and lots of folks, business in particular, many times they don't want to be the first ones out there to do something new. But we are working on that. I had a couple of folks ask me.
Seeing what Notre Dame has done in the Northeast neighborhood against it seems like they would be wise to communicate with you about innovative pocket neighborhoods.
Yeah, we're open to going anywhere. I'm not quite sure what Notre Dame's vision is in terms of the housing. It would be one of the advantages of this type of housing is that you could put a very nice pocket neighborhood in a neighborhood where you have otherwise $350,000 and $400,000 houses. I mean, that's what they've got up in that area. And I could imagine somebody would want a single house right there, but you could imagine if there are some lots there, you can imagine putting in a collection of these that fit into the fabric of the neighborhood that would allow you to have a more diverse set of ownership. And one of the things that we're concerned about and why we're interested in this type of housing is we want housing to be diverse, not in terms of race and ethnicity, but in terms of class. Right now, I'm a sociologist, and I teach social inequality. I tell my students, drive out Grape Road and you can see America's class divisions. You've got the people who are in the, under $25,000 a year incomes living in the 1 studio apartments. And then you get up to the 25 and 35, they got the 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Then you get up into the 50s and maybe they've got the duplexes, or they're starting to own the small thing. And then you get all the way up there and you've got people who are in the $450,000 houses. Developers who create these to fit into narrow incomes, and as a result of it, we're not connecting with them. So again, when we talk about this being sustainable and triple bottom line housing, being ecologically friendly and economically sound, it's also to sort of bring us back together. We're not all going to live in a tiny house. But if we have tiny houses as part of the mixture of our community, then we can all live in our neighborhoods together, we can know each other, we can get along with each other, we can understand each other. And we think that's something that's really important, so that's one of the reasons we're excited about this product. You know, we're doing it for a variety of different reasons. It's kind of a social entrepreneurial process. We're trying to figure out how can we use the market to change the way America builds its houses.
Another of the big builders that is going to be starting their, well, they've already started their construction, are the Pokagon band of
Yeah.
the Potawatomi. So this strikes me as a really great model for that type of community where you have different age groups and
Yeah, and they do. I know that they build some housing complexes for a variety of reasons. So I've seen the article, and we're on the same process. Beth North is a marketer, and so she understands things. good catch. Because I thought we probably don't talk to those folks.
I've actually had a conversation with them for about a year and a half.
Yeah. So I mean, what we're seeing is that as we began to, we focused on, this one application, but as we begun to develop and get a better sense of it and synergize more, we're beginning to see these other applications develop. Obviously, as we start a company, we're going to have to kind of focus, get something down, but we really are aware of what the possibilities are, and that's a great one that we could use. Has anybody got the time?
5.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is since it's just about over, I'm just going to thank you all. We're going to hang out around if you have any other questions. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Willow. Pay attention to Facebook. This happens every month. And just some of the coolest things are happening in South Bend. Typically show up here sometime in the year before they might show up anywhere else. And so if you want to kind of stay in touch and connect with people, and the people that are coming to these things are people who are interested in the future of this town, have great ideas, and want to contribute. This is our energy, not just building tiny houses, but putting lights on the river, redoing the Renaissance Center, transforming our streets, repurposing our river, building rain gardens, putting rain barrels up, creating local food businesses, developing co-ops. I mean, if you think about what's happening in this community, it's kind of what Mayor Pete has said, and what Mayor Steve was here in the room to talk about. It's been harnessing the community as capacity, having us work together to build our neighborhoods and our city centers, and we're working together. And that's what's so exciting about this. That's why we would love to be able to pilot this year, because we believe South Bend's going to get a lot of attention. We'd like to bask in that light.